So we're here live from PBL World in beautiful Napa, California. For those of you who aren't familiar with PBL World, it's a great conference hosted by the Buck Institute for Education, all about, you guessed it, project-based learning. I'm Clara Galan, new social media marketing assistant with Edutopia, the George Lucas Education Foundation. And I'm with a couple of, in my mind, rock stars of project-based learning world. I'll let them introduce themselves and we'll get to the nitty-gritty questions that I know you all want to hear. Just a couple of reminders. This is live, so feel free to ask any questions to Edutopia via YouTube or Google+, and we can try to answer them. Also, there will be a YouTube recording of this available on Edutopia's Google+ page and YouTube page. So welcome, Jaime McGrath, Suzie Miller, and Doehla. So please introduce yourselves.
Well, I've always wanted to be a rock star. I am but a humble teacher. I teach gifted classes in Savannah, Georgia, currently working mostly with 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders.
Hi, I'm Suzie Boss. I'm a blogger for Edutopia, and I'm part of the national faculty for the Buck Institute for Education, which is sponsoring PBL World.
And an author.
And an author of several books on PBL. Books. Thanks, Don.
It's good. Love your books. My name's Doehla, and I wear several hats. I teach French at Vintage High School here in Napa, and that's mostly what I do. But also do teacher training at UC Berkeley's Language Center with the East Bay World Language Project, and I manage the World Language Forum at Edutopia, and we sponsor a chat on Twitter once a week called Lang Chat, so I'm one of the moderators for that.
Great. So how would you describe project-based learning in your own words? I know there are a lot of misconceptions with some educators that it just involves projects in the classroom, but it's so much more than that. So how would you define it?
I guess the shortest definition I could give it that would encapsulate everything is just real learning. Mm-hmm. It is real life. It's getting in and doing something that is true. It's the opposite of the worksheet. Mm-hmm. It is something that matters.
And, you know, it's great that you said that, because one of the themes of this conference, one of our keynoters, Sam Seidel, has been talking about keeping it real, and how that's, you know, a great motto, really, for what project-based learning is all about. So that means real inquiry. It means students are real work about real important academic content, the real skills that they need to take into the future. They're producing something of value that then is presented to and appreciated by a real audience. So the reality is, you know, that what keeps this a real model.
No, I completely agree with that. What I would add to that, though, is that it's student-led and driven and engaging. It's not only is it real world, but it's students have a lot of control over what they are interested in exploring. They can collaborate. They can think deeply. They can create all kinds of wonderful things, express themselves individually, and not feel constrained by a box that holds them back.
I completely agree. And so do you feel that project-based learning allows students to learn on a deeper level? And so how is it different than other types of learning in the class, other types of traditional methods?
A lot of world language teachers, which is my field, feel the need to make kids just memorize a whole lot of structures and forms. Mm-hmm. No one ever learned a language that way. They weren't born into a world and handed a grammar book and say, mm-hmm. here are the structures, mm-hmm. memorize them, and then we'll talk to you. So in language, the deeper aspect of things has to do with exploring cultural context, which is where all communication really happens. Mm-hmm. The ways that we live together in community and the ways that we act together, and have the ability to explore those notions and the language that's connected to that. So it's not about, can I conjugate a verb on the street corner, because mm-hmm. if you do that, if I go to Montreal and conjugate the verb to be on the street corner, I'll wind up in the mental hospital. It's not real-world communication. But I can go into a cafe and really have a conversation. So they're exploring it, and they're trying to figure it out and see how the language they know is different than the one that they're learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the other differences between PBL and what we think of as kind of traditional instruction is it's much less passive. Mm-hmm. There's yes. a definite sense of student agency involved here, that students are about something in projects. You know, they need to take ownership of the topic, how it's going to unfold, what they want to produce, which questions they're asking, and I think it leads to a much more student-driven experience. And requires then a shift from in what both teachers are doing and what students are doing, because kids who are used to traditional instruction come in kind of waiting.
Yes.
They're waiting to be told. They hold their hands up,
Yeah.
and once they get into the swing of PBL, they're not waiting,
Right.
and they certainly need to and grow into that sense of driving their own learning and figuring out what that's all about.
And they don't want to demand the answer to the question. They're willing to go
Ask
and look
questions.
for the
Right.
question.
And
Right?
recognize that questions can be answered a lot of different ways.
That's
There's not one right answer. So.
To give an example of that, we have economic standards in 3rd grade for social studies, and so they have to learn about markets and scarcity, supply and demand. And so I had been teaching that the textbook way, and glassy eyes, they're asleep, I'm bored, nothing's happening, no one's learning. And so I said, okay, I'm going to do this differently. And so the students formed their own teams, invented a candy, did all the marketing and all the prep work, got the materials, manufactured the candies, and then had a market day where other students could come and purchase. And normally I don't emphasize competition, but the market is competitive. And so it was, let's see who can do the best out there in the free market. And that got them so emotionally involved in what they're doing, which is the crux of what you were saying, Suzie, that when they're emotionally involved, this is something that matters deeply to them. They want to do well. So we had chocolate covered bubble gum. That about it, chocolate covered. But it was a hit.
It was a hit.
Yeah.
There you go. And as Jamie's describing this project, it's a great example, because you can imagine how fun this would be. But I think without the full approach of project-based learning, you could approach something like that and it could be frivolous. But the way he's describing it, that is rich, deep learning that connects directly to your content standards, as you were saying, in economics. And it's going to result in, for lack of a better word, sticky learning, which goes in the bubble gum.
Messy learning.
That's good, right? But they're going to remember the content about economics. They're going to remember what it means to compete in a marketplace because they've experienced it, and that's going to stay with them in a way that obviously it didn't when they were falling asleep over their textbooks.
Yeah, good.
So like you've said, it really shows students real-world experiences, and it's very student-driven. You talked a little bit about the market, but what are some other memorable experiences you have using PBL in the classroom, or maybe that you've witnessed in the classroom from your research?
I could tell you about one thing that just totally failed this past year. But then I learned from it. So I had a technology club, and they were supposed to learn the technology and create a standards-based project, and nobody was really interested. We got together half-hour a day, and we did things, and they researched, and I pushed and pushed, and it just fizzled out. And I said, okay, what's wrong here? And it was that we were just making projects. And there was no purpose besides the product. And so I said, okay, let me do something different now. So I took a different class, and I said, okay, we have 2 weeks left in the school year, last 2 weeks. I want you to make a project that's going to help kids over the summer. And so one student said, well, we have to do summer reading. I'm going to make a book review website. And so you can go to his book review. And another group of kids said, well, kids get bored and then they just watch TV, so they should be doing something constructive. So we're going to learn how to make a bunch of crafts. And we're going to make videos, demonstrate how to use those crafts, and create a website to organize them. And so they, in 2 weeks' time, and not even, I don't even see them every day, they succeeded. It all happened, whereas I'd frittered away months trying to push kids to get these projects done. And what was missing was a purpose. There's no purpose. But when I introduced a purpose, it happened.
That's really
Which is, it's such a great example in that sense of purpose. I was in a workshop here yesterday. One of my colleagues was leading about critical thinking. And one of the things we take for granted is we're going to jump right into a project and it's going to be terrific and we've done an entry event and everyone's excited. But one of the critical thinking pieces there is making sure students understand the purpose. What's this all about? Why are we doing it? Why are we investing our time and energy? And why do I care about that? I'll share quickly an example of a project I blogged about recently for Edutopia. I it's what I blog about most of the time. So every time I find a teacher with a great project, I'm going to try to share their stories. But this one was a teacher who took on the challenge of, he was thinking about the people in the world, the billion of them, or more than 1 billion, I think something like 2 or 3 billion, who use wood or charcoal as their primary source of cooking. And it causes all kinds of health problems, particularly for kids, because they're breathing in smoke, and then beyond that, and the environmental consequences of cutting down trees to burn, deforestation, all of that. He was thinking about, how could I bring this into my classroom? It's a big topic, it's challenging, but what could my kids actually do? And he realized, okay, I teach 8th grade science. Energy is a big part of my content. So let's think about energy in the design of cook stoves.
Excellent.
And there's a whole movement around the world of some amazingly thoughtful, creative engineering types and tinkerers and makers who are trying to redesign an affordable, clean-burning cook stove that would use cleaner fuel. And so he just took this on as a challenge. He couldn't find any K-12 resources, so he thought, I'm going to figure them out. And he created a wiki, designed a curriculum around that. And what's exciting about this project is that his students were in Massachusetts, I believe, doing really a great STEM project around the design of an efficient cook stove that would burn clean fuel. So they were using kind of biomass that was readily available, and didn't involve burning, cutting down trees or anything, but test it and compare it with other students' scientific inquiry. So they've connected now with schools in Africa and in India, where they're doing their own design of cook stoves. They're running the same tests, so they're doing the work that engineers and scientists do, gathering data, comparing it, talking about their results with each other on Skype. So they're getting that sense of what it means to be a global learner, as well as a problem solver who could improve the lives of kids around the world who are really suffering because of current conditions. So that one, it sounds like this huge unwieldy project.
But there's so much there.
There's so much there, and actually what's brilliant about it is that the teacher who's put heart and soul into creating it is very open about sharing everything on a wiki. It's open source content, and he would love to have other schools, join you in that. So you can read about this in my Edutopia blog for details. For me, that's just the beauty of PBL, that it can go so much farther than your own classroom, and take your kids really on a global learning experience.
Excellent.
Way beyond pen pals.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Well, pen pals, it reminds me of my favorite project this last year was with my level 3 French students there at intermediate fluency, and in that stage of development we talk about syntactical relationships being complex sentencing, not worrying about particular structure, specific forms. They might need to use subjunctive, they might need to use a conditional tense, and so on, and we certainly help them learn how that occurs, but no one in their right mind expects that to be a perfect sentence. Doesn't have to be structurally, it needs to be structurally good. That in itself is a marker of fluency, that they can put together a complex sentence in a conjunction and so on. But that they have the verb form exactly right, that comes in time. So just backtracking from my standards and my proficiency targets, I want to aim at these complex sentences, I need a cultural context for that, and so on. How do I backtrack from there and backwards plan to create a project? So what we did was took a set of short stories. It's called Le Petit Nicolas. They're told from the point of view of a boy named Nicholas who's about 7 or 8 years old. There's like 100 stories of this, and they got to pick and choose a whole bunch of these stories and read in groups. And then I wanted them to imagine these kids 10 years older in high school now, so the age of my students. And they receive an American exchange student in their context. And so the driving question became, how can they help this American become part of their social group, integrate into their school, their lives? So they had to do a storyboard, and what they were going to do is make a film of this. And so we were preparing for a movie night. We wanted to bring in the vocabulary of the cinema, and invite there's a French-speaking community in Napa Valley, so we want to invite them in. And we also had a connection with a class of students in France who were learning English.
Oh, okay.
And so they were asking each other colloquialisms about the language. And rather than come to me and look for, how do you say, this is cool, in French, they write to their peers in France and say, hey, how do you say this? And by the way, here's some phrases we're using. So they had this real exchange that made it so much more meaningful. By the time we had movie night, we had about 60, 70 people come in to watch the films with us and had a little award ceremony and everything. It was just fabulous. They kicked it out of the park. I got the kind of fluency I wanted. They had a great time doing it, and they actually came up with a lot of accuracy as well on the way because they wanted to make it right. Motivation to actually even go to the point of, okay, I want to get this right. I want to hit the target even with accuracy. I was content with syntactical, competence, but they were willing to go even further. It was great fun. But you asked also too about where did you hit the wall and PBL being kind of messy and so on, and it is messy, and so as Lauren Shelley says, get over it. It's supposed to be messy. If you come into my classroom, it's going to be chaotic and noisy, but it's supposed to. Because if you look more carefully, that noise is representative of kids actually doing things. The hard thing, the inquiry for me, and this is what I also love about PBL, is the teacher is part of the learning community. I'm not the expert on stage disseminating information. I'm inviting my students to join with me in inquiry, and I get to be part of that. I went into teaching because I want to be a lifelong learner, and I have that opportunity. So they teach me so very much while I'm helping them learn too. But the inquiry for me was keeping them in target language. I really want them not just to talk about French, but I want them to speak French. So I'm looking into ways to scaffold that. I'm obviously only speaking French, but they're not always only speaking French. And there's a range we're trying to aim at 90% target language. It's a high goal. So there's a level at which they can use their native language, Spanish or English, whichever it is. But aiming at that. So I'm still working on that, come up with some good ideas and trying them out. And they've had some suggestions too, which I love, that they can say, okay, maybe we could try this, maybe we could try that. So I love that about it.
Right, and that whole phrase, messy learning, I think it goes along with PBL, which can intimidate some teachers. So I think it's good to kind of unpack that a little bit of what does it mean that there really is a method behind the mess. It's not just a free-for-all. I wrote a piece several years ago for Ed Leadership called Managing Messy Learning, looking at some strategies of, why would we want to create a mess in the classroom? What's the value of that, and how do we make sense of it? And I think teachers who have been here this week at this conference at PBL World have been taking part in 3-day workshops to learn how to teach, design, and assess project-based learning. And I think they've had that experience of being learners in a messy but productive classroom. I've had just great fun going from room to room, watching the conversations unfold, watching teachers in the learner role taking part in different kinds of activities that require them to do a lot of work with peers and to produce a lot of artifacts. The rooms are just filling up with, with stuff, really, that represents, captures their thinking at that moment so that it becomes visible, so they can talk about it, so others can respond to it. So there's a lot of stuff happening in a really good PBL setting, but there's a purpose behind all of it. And I think teachers who are here this week taking part in that, they got to experience that firsthand, which for teachers who are new to PBL, helps break the ice. It's a big change from being kind of in control from the front, thinking about components, all those things that go with traditional teaching, to giving kids the opportunity, but also the responsibility to be really good peer learners and to take part more actively in their own learning. So it's messy but great.
to draw another thing out of Don's awesome project there, is that the easiest way to make an entry, project-based learning, is a performance or a presentation, because that is what, as I was saying before, gives it the purpose. Because we're going to be doing this in front of people, then all of a sudden it's a whole different world. So as a stepping stone for teachers new to project-based learning, just taking that assignment and saying, okay, well, let's do this for the third graders. Let's do this for your parents.
Yeah.
Let's perform this. Let's video this and show it on the school news. That changes everything right there.
It does. And it's so much more meaningful to them as a result. They know that my kids knew that they were going to send these movies to their friends in France, as well as real life people face to face, and they were kind of intimidated by that at first. They said, okay, we'll give it a shot. And when the movie night came, they were all nervous about, oh, what are we going to do? So they all made just some foods to bring in as well to kind of help with that. But the reaction of the public was just superb. All the French speakers from the local community who came in were jaw-dropping about, wow, these kids could do this with only 3 years of language. And so the affirmation emboldened them to be able to take on greater challenges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's amazing because it gives them a real-life purpose. And I want to know, what's the purpose of this project that I'm doing? And of course, that's an excellent example of that. So I think as teachers, we might be a little hesitant because we're nervous to start something different. So what are some of the kind of messy or even embarrassing situations that you've had trying new project-based learning? So I know you talked a little bit about the tech project that you had, but what are some other examples that we teachers can learn from, and maybe what did you learn from those experiences?
So I'm reading The Passionate Teacher right now, and he says in there that the passionate teacher is going to be making more mistakes than anyone else.
Yes, it's true.
Because you're taking the most risks.
Yes.
And so,
that's right.
Risks every day.
Yes, I'm proud of my mistakes. But you can go first.
Trial and error, right? For success.
Well, I mean, part of the big shift for me was one of the things I've been teaching for 30 years now. So one of the things I've always not liked very much about teaching is the assessment afterwards of stuff.
Yes.
These piles of papers and so on. And so in PBL, the shift goes from spending hours and hours after the fact to before the fact and planning and being able to be creative in coming up with projects. The one I just mentioned about my film project was one that I developed particularly for this incoming group this last year because I knew them and I thought, oh, I know that they can rise to I'm going to give them a real challenge. The embarrassing moments that did occur with this were, even despite my planning, realizing that, oh, I forgot to do this or I forgot to do that. And embarrassing partly because I'm a perfectionist and I've got to have it just right, you know. But realizing that it's okay to flow with the moment, and though I forgot to plan for, or though I had an idea that it would work and it didn't work, we had permission to redo or fix or change. For example, for critical thinking, I developed a rubric that had 6 things to evaluate. And the kids look at this and, you want us to do all this? And I go, I realize, wow, it is a lot to ask, isn't it? And I just decided I'm going to be transparent with these. They know me. These kids know me. They chose to come here because they want to work with me this year. I said, so what do you suggest? And I decided that, you know, I said, okay, then, and which 2 would you want? Talk about that in your groups. What would be most meaningful to you? Because ultimately, really, I want to be able to give them feedback and something that matters to them. So my intuition was okay on that. It's like, it was embarrassing because I thought, yeah, we're going to do this. And they came back, and I was surprised at the ones they chose. They chose the most stringent one, which had to do with synthesis of stuff. And then the application strand that I had. Those were the most meaningful to us. We really can do this, and it'll be good for us to get feedback from you on it. So I invited them into the moment, and it saved the day. Other things were like just details of planning. Like I hadn't planned that we would use Google Docs to share folders so I could give them feedback and comments on their scripts. I wanted them to write scripts, but I didn't think through that process deeply enough. So they were asking, oh, you want us to give this on paper? And oh, no. So we had to But again, they helped me
Mm-hmm.
brainstorm through the options, and we came up with a solution and set up folders that we could share in Google Docs, and that turned out to be the best thing. So I learned from lack of planning on my part, which feels a little embarrassing when you're a career level teacher at this point. You feel like you should have everything under control. You don't, but it's okay. It's totally okay.
And this past year I had was fourth graders have to learn linear measurement.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, we're going to build a fence around our garden. We have a garden at school, and it needs a fence because kindergartners are out there and they'll trample my tomatoes. So building a fence is a great way to learn linear measurement. So I got bamboo, went over to another school, and they had bamboo growing. Sure, cut it down. So Devin helped me and my son, and we brought a load of bamboo. I said, okay, well, I want to get them used to working with the materials. I said, why don't we make a wind chime
Oh, yeah.
first, get used to working with the material, then we'll design and build the fence. A month later, after restarting several times, I only see these kids a couple times a week, restarting several times, eventually we got that wind chime, and then they said, oh, and it clicked, and we got the fence. But there was so much failure along the way. You're saying that's what engages the creative problem solving.
Yes.
That's what engages the logical problem solving. And we shouldn't protect kids from that kind of failure, because that's what we do in real life, is we try things, we forget, we mess up, and we have to fix it. Most of building and creating is fixing what didn't work the way you wanted it to.
So you're bringing up a really important point is about perseverance. We want kids to learn how to persevere, but we also have to persevere through our mistakes, right? So some teachers will say, there's no way I'm going to do project-based learning because of this issue. And really, it's actually part of the learning process. It's an important skill. How many kids will just give up on anything because they don't have resilience, they don't have perseverance, if they can't get the answer right now, then forget it, I'm just not going to do it. Whereas in this context, it's okay to fail. And then we take a moment to think through that and develop some critical analysis skills that we wouldn't have if we didn't make mistakes along the way.
It's such a key point, and I think you're raising a couple things. One is that the PBL teacher embodies a lot of the qualities that you want to see in your students. So you're willing to put yourself out there, you're willing to try new things, you're willing to make adjustments and learn. And when we talk about learning from failure, the beauty of PBL is that you do learn from failure, but you learn in time to reflect, make adjustments, learn, and make it right. You don't want to end the project with failure. You want to end the project with great, fabulous success. Our students are mastering the academic goals that have been throughout, embedded in the project throughout. They're learning the 21st century skills that you've identified as being really important, whether it's collaboration or creativity or whatever it may be. But in that messy middle part of the project, that you need to think about planning in time, not necessarily for failure, but for multiple, for reflection, multiple drafts, that iterative process where you prototype something very rough, get your ideas out, whether it's a writing project or something physical, an idea that's still formative, get that out fast.
Absolutely.
Bring more research and thinking to it, get some peer critique, maybe have some experts help you think about what would make this better or troubleshoot what's not working, and then continue with the process. It may not be better on the second time. It may take 3, 4, 5 drafts to get where you want to get. But that you need to allow in your project calendar time for that to happen.
That's right.
You don't want failure to be happening at the end. No. You want it. You want failure and recovery. So we talk about the messy middle and failing fast. And fail to learn to fail and make failure part of the learning process.
So we're not going to get through the textbook in a year, right? I know we laugh, but so I have a department of 9 people, and I like people very much. They're sweet people. We have good relationships. They're friends, but we're at different places, and that's okay. But part of the issue is that I'm not going to get through the textbook. But what my kids know, they own. And they own it deeply. They own it well. And so, they're not going to have had whatever content is supposedly in those chapters because we're not using the book.
Right.
But what they do have, they really have.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, it's a
and
difference
we've
between-
thought about it.
Right.
So reflection, I just wanted to make a comment about that too. I learned reflection by going through National Board certification deeply, and I've valued it so very much since. And look for purposeful opportunities for my kids to step back and reflect as well. And sometimes we're going to do that in English, and sometimes we do it in target language in French. I use Edmodo a lot. I post a prompt to say, today you got to quick write a prompt. It's a spontaneous opportunity for language in written form, and they put it in. Or we might have a verbal kind of reflection. But it's really, really critical to process the things that are going on, both for the students as well as for me, whether it's a conversation with us all together or them individually in writing or speaking. And they can record a voice kind of thing. Call Google Voice and leave me a message on your thoughts on this.
Right. And it's that reflection that's happening throughout the project. Don't save it for the end.
Right. Do it along the way.
Along the way, and keep mixing it up. As you're saying, you don't have to always have reflection be write me a paragraph on today's reflection prompt. You can do it, as he's saying, all kinds of creative ways.
Or maybe kids keeping a blog along the way of their journey.
Or doing
and being able to see that growth from day 1 to day 180, that there's been transformation and change. That is really powerful for kids to see.
Definitely. And it seems that students tend to learn through that messy process just as much as the teachers do. There's that room for reflection because it's so student-driven. So what are some successful strategies that you have encountered with project-based learning, for new teachers that want to get started? Maybe successful strategies you can think of from your experiences or from what you've witnessed in the classroom.
I love the no need to know paradigm that we used as we opened the project. After we've done our entry event or entry document, whichever way we've come into this, and identified the driving question, it's time to go through what do we know, what do we need to know. And in my case, we actually do this in target language. I put it up on a whiteboard. I scaffold it with a few sentence starters so that it can stay in target language. But whatever they identify as we know, we already own this. This is really good. And the need to know list is their questions for inquiry. We need to know this, we need to know that. Sometimes it's linguistically based, sometimes it's culturally based, and sometimes it's cognitive based. It's just an idea concept that they have to explore. And as we come back and we visit this frequently, we revisit it often. I put it on Edmodo so they can keep it before them, but then it goes up on the board every other day or so, or at least once a week. And as we answer their questions, I'm moving them over. And by the time we get to the end of the project, they can compare where they were at the beginning, where they were at the end, and we've answered all the questions. And if we haven't quite yet, we've not finished the project, really. So we just keep moving those over. And that's really validating for them to actually be able to see their growth as a community, a learning community, that the questions that they've had, they've answered and moved over. And we keep adding on new questions that come up as it goes. So that's I think one of the things I love the most about this process.
So just to clarify, so it's great to start with a KWL chart for students, just so they're it's really student-driven questions, that they're answering their own questions.
Right.
Fantastic. It's a great reference for teachers.
Oh, there are so many strategies we could offer, but I'm thinking of teachers who are really brand new to this, and I think one of the keys is finding places to kind of see this in action can be helpful. And frankly, Edutopia is a great resource for that. Taking a look at some of the videos that just will immerse you in a project experience. There's one about PBL from start to finish, which shows you the whole process, and you get in just a nutshell what this is about. And I think teachers who are trying to, with great intention, trying to teach through PBL, having never experienced it themselves and having never seen it, it's going to be hard. It's like reinventing everything yourself. But there's a lot of great support for you to help you. And I think another strategy is, if you can, go visit a classroom.
Right.
Either a colleague's classroom or take a field trip to a school that does PBL well, and get a chance to see what it's like. And then, from there, you'll have a better sense of what your own goals are, what sort of environment you want to create. We could go on and on with many more strategies, but I think just getting a picture in your head of what is it I'm trying to aim for here? What's that end in mind that I want to be able to achieve in my classroom is something that might be helpful.
And so that the Schools That Work series we were talking about from Edutopia. Right.
Good stuff, lots of rubrics
and just lots of other videos as well that illustrate, if you search videos in PBL on Edutopia, you'll get a gold mine. Yeah.
Great. The big thing is to relax.
Yes.
Relax.
Really?
So good. So good.
It's always like, oh my goodness, I have to finish subtraction in a week. And we're driven by these pacing guides. And, it's a must-do for teachers. I mean, that's the reality. We must teach this much stuff in this much time. And yet we find that when we relax, we become so much more efficient and effective. That's something I learned teaching chess to students. I would teach them the moves and then say, go ahead and play. And they would flatline. They would play, and no one would get better, and eventually everyone would get bored. And then I said, well, let me do this differently. So we started where I'll play a game against all of my students. So it's me against everyone. And they have to decide on a move together. And you cannot believe the discussions. They will spend literally a half hour fiercely debating different moves, and then maybe not even make a decision. And then, okay, next day we'll carry it over. So we will spend, literally, I'm not kidding, we will spend 3 months playing one game, and they will learn way more in that than any other chess teaching method I've tried. Just that one game that takes 3 months.
That's
great.
So relax.
So you talk about resources too, and it's one thing to try things out in your room and go and do some research and inquiry, but it's really, really important to establish a good PLN, professional learning network. We can wind up very isolated, and as I mentioned earlier, I've got a great department of 9 people, but we're not all at the same place, and that's fine. But I need to be able to talk with somebody. I do have one person in my department doing PBL with me, and that's very, very cool. And there are a couple people starting to get interested, but I need to reach out past that. So I use the community forum at Edutopia, managing the World Language Forum. That gives me the privilege to pose questions and get people involved in that. But we're also using things like Twitter and other social media opportunities to reach out and establish a group of people with whom you can work. We're not alone. We talk about PBL as creating a learning community within the classroom, but PBL is also a mode of inquiry beyond the classroom. We need to do this in community. No one person can know everything it takes to make it work. We need each other. I love Suzie's books because they inspire me, and I appreciate that she takes the time to write those books and also post things. But it inspires me then to try something out and share with others. I've used so many things in your books to encourage teachers who are interested to say, hey, Suzie talked about this in her book. Try this. Let's think about how we might apply it. Or somebody else. It's something I've learned in PBL chat or off of the Edutopia or the Buck Institute site as well. BIE.org has a lot of great resources. Just pulling those things in and thinking them and engaging in inquiry. I have a group of about 10, 12 French teachers with whom I'm working most closely. And they're not just in the United States. We're talking with teachers in Canada, U.S., France, and England, and there's a fellow in Cote d'Ivoire and a gal in Thailand even that are in this sort of group of 10, 12 people that we're working closely and talking to each other deeply about what do you think about this and what do you think about that.
That's great.
Really important.
Yeah, and again, you're modeling. What does it mean to be a 21st century learner? Your students, and sometimes you may bring those other folks into your classroom in some way, just a reference. Last night I was on a Google Hangout with a friend in Thailand or wherever it may be, and so they see that your own world is extending much further than that classroom or school or whatever you may be. Just this week here at PBL World, where we had 500 teachers from many countries participating, I could see the relationships forming. And people were getting each other, connected on Twitter. There's an Edmodo group focused on project-based learning that the Buck Institute hosts. Lots of folks were connecting there. We had a very active PBL chat Tuesday night on Twitter. Great resources getting shared out there. So yesterday we got a bunch of folks set up on Google Plus so they can have Hangouts now with their new friends. So you can see these relationships forming. And I think, as Don's saying, those networks are so critical because if you're the kind of teacher who's not in a school that is doing project-based learning wall-to-wall, it can get very lonely. And you can be feeling like you're on an island or the only one singing this song. It's not a good feeling. But there's a very welcoming community of people who are passionate about project-based learning and are eager to share resources, eager to help you be successful. And sometimes one of the great ways to get started with a project is to join someone who's a veteran at project-based learning and is willing to have you come on in and do this project together. So you have a mentor and someone to be a colleague.
And you can even build this kind of collaboration in your school, even if it's not happening. My colleague, Vonnie Gardner, came up with the idea of a monthly breakfast meeting. So we're the gifted specialists, and we have our classroom teachers that we work with. So we feed them, we wine and dine them. Okay, it's breakfast. I know, it's breakfast. And we do breakfast right, and she has a flair for it. I would just be paper plates, and there's the grub, but she makes it beautiful. And we all come together, and we share those ideas. Well, what are you doing? What didn't work? What worked? And they have, and just once a month, and they've been so invigorating because if you don't make the time to get together with the people you work with, then you won't. And you'll just never talk with them. And that isolation you spoke of, it will just grow, become this black mass that just takes over. It's just me against these kids. But to build that community takes an effort. And we had to go out and buy some bagels.
Exactly. It does take an effort. And you could find yourself sort of discouraged to the point of saying, I'm going to give up. But it does take effort. Absolutely does take effort. But the rewards are so great. So worthwhile.
You share a meal with people.
Yeah.
Well,
that's right. I mean,
family.
compagnon is you're breaking the bread one with another and sharing that. It's that's an important notion, isn't it? Yeah.
So it really is about the community of learners, and as teachers, I feel like our professional development is really learning from one another and sharing ideas. But you mentioned Edutopia and the Schools That Work series and also the Buck Institute. But what are some other resources or maybe publications that we can refer to as we continue on our journey of project-based learning?
So can I jump in with a shameless plug?
Of course, go ahead.
I'll do it for you.
But wait, there's more. If you order now.
That's right. So just this week. My newest publication was published by the Buck Institute. It's called PBL for 21st Century Success.
It's very good. You need a copy.
Operators are standing by.
But the idea here is, we all talk about 21st century learning as being critical for student success. Our keynote this morning was Mark Chun from the Hewlett Foundation talking about the skills that competencies employers are looking for in future hires. They want critical thinkers, collaborators. But these ways of working together don't happen automatically. So this book takes a look at each of what we call the 4 C's. We all know them. Each in really depth and in how would you deliberately teach and develop those skills, those competencies, so that they become kind of part of the student's toolkit and goes with them from one project to the next, from one developmental milestone to the next. So over time they get really good. And so it's just kind of a toolkit style, lots of practical resources and tips and strategies that I've been gathering from smart teachers, I know in my network.
Right, and then you have the time to actually sit down and write.
And learn from them, which is great. So that's one resource that I'd offer.
I agree. I think you get some good books. I'm an unrepentant book nerd. I admit it. I have way too many books that I can keep track of. But I've started keeping a book group on Digo. Of just collecting together. Okay, I've read this book, and I can put a little blurb on there, and make that available to my PLN and say, hey, here's some books that I've read and recommend for you too. As well as websites I come across and so on. I encourage people to curate their content And it's not just put a bookmark on your Chrome browser or your Safari browser or whatever you're using, because that starts eating away at your memory, and you wind up with so many things that are unsorted, and you
You'll
can't
never go
find
back.
it.
They'll not so helpful.
You need a tool like Digo or Delicious or something like that, or Pearl Trees, whatever you like, and put that there and use the tags so that you can come back and sort them well. Tag features really, really critical. I use Evernote for everything.
Oh, Evernote. Yeah.
I take pictures in there. I take voice recordings in there. I save website stuff in there to remind me to come back and just kind of think and take notes. And I journal a lot. I live life intensely. It's not for everybody. It's just that's what I do. But this is what has helped support me and my own growth. And then I remember something sort of vaguely, and I can go back and find it to share with somebody I'm talking with about a question and say, here it is.
There's even a PBL group on Digo.
Yes, there is.
Collectively sharing and curating PBL resources. So that's another resource for folks.
And you touched on it before, Don, but finding the person in your school, in your district, in your area who's doing it well, who's doing it successfully, and then just go and watch a master at work. That's right. And see how it comes together. See how they handle that one kid who says, I don't want to do this. Like what actually happens on the ground, and how do good teachers handle that?
And be willing to be the person to be visited too.
Yes, that's true. Open your doors.
Be open. Because the person coming to visit you too is going to see things from a different angle, and you learn so much from visitors. I strongly encourage people to go to conferences like this one, where you can make those networking commitments and invest in your own rejuvenation. I'll put a shameless plug in too. In end of July at UC Santa Barbara, I'm doing a week-long training for project-based learning in world languages. Through the California World Language Project. There's a flyer on Google, and they're still taking signups, but it's a great opportunity to have a whole week in Santa Barbara.
Sounds nice.
Which is wonderful, and just think deeply with other teachers interested in that, in a low-key atmosphere, a good social time to have together, 2 meals together, and just think for a whole week deeply about what it is. So just encourage people to come. There's still opportunities. Things like that, whether it's that one or another one is not the point, but just investing in your own learning, really important.
Right. I know I'm going from here on to the ISTE conference,
and
which I know there'll be a big Edutopia group there, but I'm doing a PBL session and a PBL Birds of a Feather, which is one of the informal get-togethers at ISTE, just to bring these sorts of teachers together in a, let's meet up for an hour and just make sure we all know each other and touch base, in the same room.
So I know a lot of the concerns of educators are that we have to make our lesson plans form to the state standards and the national standards, and unfortunately a lot of teachers are ending up teaching to the test because they need their students to pass STAR testing. So how would you recommend that teachers counter this issue and to make sure that project-based learning is in adherence with the state and national standards?
Well, if you're assessing your students on a weekly basis in all their subjects, if you are giving the tests and you have grades and you have evidence, there's no principal who could come in and say, I don't like what you're doing. Exactly. So I mean, so much of what we have to do in schools needs to be data-driven. We need to find out where students are, what they need to learn, and then get them there. And so if you have data, and of course all the research you mentioned on project-based learning, to back up what you're doing, there is no issue because they're learning. It's here. But you have to make sure that's there.
And I think being really intentional at the planning stage of a project.
That's right.
What are the content standards that this project addresses? I mean, time is our big resource, and we can't afford to lose it. We can't afford to waste it. You want to allow plenty of time for deep learning, but you want it to be intentional learning. So be really careful about, here are the key content strategies we're going to address in this project, and we're going to learn it, and we're going to learn it really well, and they're going to support build on what we've learned in the past. And I think the other thing that's reassuring, if it's a good PBL situation, a good classroom, your school leader or person doing a classroom walkthrough should be able to walk in and talk with any student in the room and ask, what are you learning right now? Why are you doing what you're doing? What's the question that you're answering? And they should be able to talk about that.
Definitely.
So the we're gathering and growing a wonderful evidence base, research base about the effectiveness of PBL, and that research I know is being shared by Edutopia and by the Buck Institute, and it's really important. And I think that's the big picture of that PBL is effective, and we can point to research that shows that. But I think on a day-to-day basis, you need to know that your own approach to PBL is also effective because you're addressing important content and you're being really serious about that.
Yeah, I think the word intentional is a really good one. I'm intentionally backwards planning.
But yes, definitely.
So I start with my documents, which, in my case, California World Language Standards, I had the privilege of helping to write just at an early stage, but so I know those well, and so I want to address these. I'm dealing with interpersonal communication, presentational communication, and so on, these kinds of things. And just start there, and they will fall into place. Alongside that, I have my 8 elements for PBL. How is that fitting in? I developed a template for our world language planning that I make available through the Edutopia World Language blog. And just to help guide that process of planning so that I am ensured that it's there. And so because of that, I'm confident that it's going to come out. Our world language standards are not technically tested in the same way as English and social sciences, but I know what kids are learning in world language directly supports their skills in English and math, science inquiry. One of the things I am excited about with Common Core, not that I'm excited about everything with Common Core, but I don't have to be, is that it's skills-based as opposed to discrete item-based. I think it'll prove to be much more freeing for teachers. That a student can reason is a good target. That's a good learning target. And along with that, then, as Suzie mentioned, students should be able to surface exactly what they're learning if a walkthrough happens or if they're asked. Or even if I ask, what are we learning today? And to that end, I think it's important to have daily agendas to help keep kids on track with where we are with the projects. And for me, a daily agenda includes I can statements, which are our learning targets. Today, I can do, I can do this, I can ask that, I know this, I know that, in terms of the conceptual things that we're addressing. They get one of those at the beginning of a unit. It's part of the packet that helps guide the inquiry, and a checkoff list for them along the way saying, I can't do this yet. I can do this with help. I can do this, and I can help someone else do this. And that's the checkoff, just those 4 columns. And as they move across, they check it off, and they can see their progress too.
They're learning so much more there, like how to meet a deadline. I mean, that is an important life skill.
Put that on the skill.
And that in later grades, that's just expected. And of course, in the real world, it's just expected.
And that's not in the standards, but it is a learning
outcome. But by gum, we're
outcome.
going to teach that.
Yeah,
A learning outcome of
learning.
significant value. Absolutely. Managing time and so on. Yeah, not in our standards.
Yeah,
it
that's so
doesn't need
important
to be,
for students.
but it does need to be an outcome. Yeah. And tech kinds of issues too, right? I mean, tech skills. I know what a window is. I know what a tab is. I know how to, in my case, I know how to insert accents.
That is important for language.
These kinds of things, right? So those are also things that need to go on that list as a learning target. So it's not just my content standards and my national proficiency goals for me in world languages, but it's also, I'm looking at ISTE student outcomes. I'm also looking at all kinds of the 8 elements of project learning, as I mentioned, and the 4 C's of 21st century skills, and keeping that as a checklist for myself to ensure every project touches on all those things. Now, it's a big thing, and so it reminds me that it's like that can feel very overwhelming for a teacher. So as I do workshops for teachers, I like to quote my favorite proverb is, it comes from the Zulu people, and it's this, not that we would actually do this, but how do you eat an elephant? You don't want to eat an elephant. But how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time and in community. One bite at a time and in community. And so we start with what we can do, and we gradually keep building, and we give ourselves permission to keep adding those elements in over a period of of the years that were involved in this process.
And you don't have to do them all in every project,
Indeed.
right?
Right.
You're selective.
You're selective.
But over time, eventually,
exactly.
you know, and you're thinking about what's the map of these projects. If I'm doing several projects over the course of a year, how does, you know, how am I like reinforcing what we already learned, but taking it to the next step, or adding another layer, or bringing in a different 21st century skill. Maybe. So you don't have to do it all the time in every project.
That's right.
But you want to think about all of those when you're planning. Which of these, you know, what am I going to pull from, and what are we going to aim for? What's the mix kind of this project?
And they don't have to be huge. You can
Right.
you can have a 1 hour project, start to finish.
Exactly.
Right.
We need to learn the elements of poetry, and St. Patrick's Day is coming. Let's write limericks, analyze the elements of the poetry, and they're learning right on the standard.
Right.
You have something that they've produced that shows that they learned it, and then you can share those. You can have a presentation, a limerick night, and keep it clean.
That's fantastic.
That is true. Okay. That's good. That's very good.
I think the last point that I want to touch on is in terms of assessment. So I know that what I love as a teacher is a lot of portfolio-based assessment, project-based assessment, and instead of, you know, high-stakes testing. So what are some ways that you would assess students? You know, maybe concrete examples or just in general, as opposed to the high-stakes tests that many students have to take now?
Well, it's a big project. I like to take a couple of days and have them write the rubric that they will be graded on. And it takes time, but then they are setting the standard, and they bring it to me and say, well, Mr. McGrath, how about this? And it's like, well, we have to put a number on that. You know, how many spelling mistakes, or how, and then they're setting the standard, they're saying, this is what I'm going to do to be excellent. And so when they've created the rubric, obviously a huge amount of buy-in, and it's specific to them and their project. This is what I'm doing, and this is how I'm going to assess myself. And they'll score themselves, and I'll score them as well.
I love involving students. Like, that's great. Yeah.
But that they get that rubric at the beginning of the project. You know, they know at the end, turn in your stuff, then get graded. But on what? You know, the rubric at the beginning helps them know, what am I aiming for? What does quality work look like? You know, there are examples. It's great that you invest the time to write them with your students. Some teachers will do that. Others want to take a ready-made rubric and adapt it. And then, again, the Buck Institute, BIE.org, has lots of downloadable rubrics.
So does Edutopia.
So does Edutopia, right. So you don't have to do all this from scratch if it's new to you. But even if your students aren't writing the rubric, they need to understand it. Maybe they're going to rewrite what you have in mind in student language, so that they really own what does quality look like. I've even seen teachers, you know, have students use the rubric to let's assess some samples from previous projects and think about, were they good? Were they not good? How good were they? You know, so they're getting that sense of a critical eye, of helping them understand what is quality work all about, what goes into it. So that's a piece of it. And I think the final assessment of a project, I guess 2 more quick points on assessment. One is thinking about your formative assessment throughout the project.
Yes.
You don't want to save assessment for the end. You know, it's so important. It doesn't mean that you're grading all that formative assessment, but you're definitely doing it and using it to inform your teaching. So you're making shifts on the fly as you need to, based on what you're seeing about our students learning, where are they struggling, a million good examples of what those formative tools could be that we could probably spend a whole nother hour talking about.
I won't go into those.
Yeah. But then that final piece of, you know, where's this all going? What's going to add up to a culminating product or showcase, or there's going to somehow demonstrate what they've learned, either by making something, telling you something, teaching someone something, somehow sharing it. And the assessment of that should be in keeping with the theme or the flavor of the project. You know, it should feel like, if I were doing this project in the real world as an historian, you know, I would present my work maybe in an exhibit, and so the product is, you know, how you're conveying history to the world. Just as an example. And so then the assessment is of that, you know, how well does this meet the standards of, you know, an historical exhibit. So make it real, even in the assessment. And, and I'm sure you've got a million assessment strategies.
I've got a lot of
we could spend a
assessment
lot of time
strategies.
on that.
I'll just focus on portfolios because I really love that kids can see the difference in their learning from beginning to end. So I have kids create a wiki page that they use through the whole time that they're learning French with me and my colleague who has some for second year language. But all of their projects have to go on their wikis. If it's a tangible thing, we take photographs so that we can see what they made if it's not a digital project, or if it's a composition, it's even just pasted there, so they can see even whatever they've made. It can all go on the wiki somehow. I have a scanner in the room. We can take pictures with phones. It's all going to go there in that space. And so part of the reflection piece is just looking at their journey over time and commenting on. I noticed that I used to do this and now I do that. And along with that is what was it? One more thing. Oh my goodness, I just lost my brain.
We've been talking.
Oh
goodness.
It's been a while.
Oh, sorry, forgot.
Portfolio.
Well, I was loving
Portfolio,
your example before with the long rubric that was too long, and you had the student
Yeah.
revolt
Right.
and the willingness to take something,
And piece it out.
get them involved in it.
Yeah, I love that idea of portfolio-based assessment, especially on Google Docs. You know, in my past, I've had
Yes.
students do writing portfolios, and then they can comment on each other's writing. Same in Spanish. You know, they wrote skits, and then they could comment on each other. And I can go in. Google Docs is a great
Great place
opportunity
to share
for that.
these things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great collaborative. Too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Keep them together.
Okay, well, if you have any other additional comments that you would like to add, I think we've covered a lot, haven't we?
We have covered a lot.
Yeah.
Relax,
Relax.
and keep trying.
Yeah, and
Right,
have fun.
right.
Have fun with it.
And you know, to really get active in this community. I mean, physically here in Napa this
Yeah,
week's been
come to the
wonderful.
conference.
Just the
Right.
energy here has been so infectious. But it's a global community and virtual as well. And so join in. Find a way to get join the party. It's a pretty good group.
I remember what I was going to say.
Oh,
and
go
it's a
ahead.
good kind of
Okay.
a closure thing.
There we go.
I was struggling with a final exam for my French 3 class because we have to give a final exam, and I don't want to give them some traditional thing. And so we had done an in-depth study about French-speaking Canada, and in that course we had watched a movie, French-speaking Canadian movie, which is where my family's from, so I relate to this really well. And because my first language is French, and I grew up speaking Canadian French, when I went to France, the accent issue was a problem. And so my idea was, how can I engage my kids in something really fun and they can kick it out of the park? So I put this thing together, and it was a bit challenging. And I said to the students, that they were going to create a movie ad campaign for this movie in France. So they're this ad company, and they have to piece it together. They get an hour to make it, and then they present to the class.
Wow, fast.
Wow.
It was fast.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely fun.
Yeah.
But when I put this together, because there were several pieces, I said, I hope you guys aren't going to freak out because you only have like an hour to get this ready. And one student yelled out, "Are you kidding? I'm not freaked out. I'm freaked in. This is great.
That's awesome.
I've never had
I love it.
a final like this." And the whole class said, "Yeah, this is great. We love it." And I said, "Wow, that's the best statement I could have ever heard
that's
about a
fantastic.
student's perspective on PBL."
Mm-hmm.
See, it's not about the assessment. It was
That's the
their
title of your
I know,
mindset.
freaked
about
in. I like that.
being
title.
freaked in. I'm
Cool.
freaked in
That's
about
great.
this.
I love
Yeah.
that.
And that student's actually
today's hashtag. I
Hashtag.
think, yeah.
Hashtag freaked in.
that student's actually here helping us with filming for the
Oh,
conference.
that's great.
Okay.
I think I've met that student.
His name
yes,
is Aaron. Yeah,
absolutely. He's
super.
great. Oh, great.
Anyway, but that I would leave you with that as a great closing statement. Kids are totally freaked in about this kind of
That's
learning
funny.
because they really own it. It means something to them.
Right.
And that, to me, is the most convincing argument of why we would bother. It's a lot of work, yeah, and there's a learning curve, but it's the reason we went into teaching is for our kids.
Right.
So
You're freaked
I'm
in.
freaked in because they're freaked in. Yeah.
That's great.
No, and I agree. Students are so excited about project-based
They
learning, and it's giving them real-world experiences that they can apply. So it looks like we're about at that time. I wanted to thank you so much for joining us,
Great fun.
Jaime McGrath, Suzie Boss, and Doehla. So I also wanted to thank the Buck Institute for Education for hosting PBL World and supporting Edutopia's Hangout. Be sure to visit the Buck Institute for Education's website at bie.org, or you can follow them on Twitter at BIEPBL for more information on the Institute and project-based learning. Remember that the recording of this lives on Google Plus and on YouTube. And for those of you who are going to ISTE, our Edutopia team will be doing another live Google Hangout, and we're having a karaoke party on Tuesday. So make sure to follow Edutopia on Google+, Twitter, and YouTube for all of our updates. I'm Clara Galan, signing out from PBL World 2013 in Napa, California. Here's to all of you incorporating more project-based learning in your classrooms.